What if I told you that JP Morgan's infamous $2.4 billion loss in 2012 was not a trading mistake, but a carefully orchestrated distraction from a far more sinister truth? What if the real story is in it about one rogue trader in London, but about a financial weapon so powerful that it transferred $10 trillion from your savings, your pension, and your future into the vaults of the world's wealthiest institutions? You feel it every time you check your bank account, every time inflation eats your paycheck, every time you wonder why a decent home costs 10 times what your parents paid. That pain isn't random. It's the echo of a heist executed in plain sight. And today, we're going to show you exactly how they pulled it off. But first, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments, because this story affects every single one of us, no matter where we live. And if you're ready for the unfiltered truth about how the financial system really works, hit that subscribe button, because we're about to go deep into the rabbit hole, and trust me, you won't see banking the same way again. Let's rewind to 1999, the year the Glass-Steagall Act died. For 66 years, this Depression-era law kept a firewall between your savings account and Wall Street's casino. Commercial banks took deposits and made loans. Investment banks gambled with rich people's money. Simple, safe, boring. But boring doesn't make billionaires. So in November 1999, President Clinton signed the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, and that firewall exploded. Suddenly, the same bank holding your mortgage could bet against it in a derivatives market you didn't even know existed. Sound familiar? It should, because today, your regional bank, your credit union, your trusted financial partner is legally allowed to use your deposits as collateral for speculative trades in markets so complex that even the traders don't fully understand them. Within 3 years of deregulation, the derivatives market exploded from $60 trillion to over $140 trillion in notional value. That's more than twice the GDP of the entire planet. Sound familiar? Because today, that number has surpassed $600 trillion, and it's all built on the same shaky foundation of synthetic bets layered on top of synthetic bets. But here's where it gets truly insane. In 2000, another law passed with almost zero media coverage, the Commodity Futures Modernization Act. Sounds boring, right? It wasn't. This law specifically exempted credit default swaps from any regulatory oversight. Let me translate that for you. It made it legal to create insurance on financial products without holding any reserves to pay out claims. Imagine selling fire insurance on every house in your neighborhood, but keeping $0 in the bank to actually cover a fire. Now imagine selling that same insurance policy to 50 different people on the same house. Sound familiar? Because that's exactly what Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, and yes, JP Morgan did with mortgage-backed securities. They didn't just insure the risk, they weaponized it. By 2005, Wall Street had created a new financial Frankenstein called synthetic collateralized debt obligations, or synthetic CDOs. Here's how it worked, and pay attention, because this is where the true evil lives. A bank would bundle 1,000 mortgages into a security. That's a regular CDO. But then, instead of just selling that security, they would create credit default swaps that bet on whether those mortgages would fail. Those bets became new securities. Those new securities got bundled and sold again, and again, and again. One pool of 1,000 mortgages could generate 50,000 derivative contracts, each one traded, leveraged, and resold across the global financial system. And here's the kicker. The people buying these synthetic CDOs had zero connection to the original mortgages. They weren't homeowners, they weren't lenders, they were just gamblers placing bets on whether your neighbor would default on their loan. You won't believe the name behind the most aggressive synthetic CDO program in history, but before we get there, understand this. By 2007, there were more credit default swaps on mortgage securities than there were actual mortgages. The shadow market had grown larger than the real economy. That's not capitalism. That's a Ponzi scheme with a Bloomberg terminal. Now here comes the mid-script twist that changes everything. In 2006, a small hedge fund manager named John Paulson, who nobody had heard of, convinced Goldman Sachs to help him build a synthetic CDO specifically designed to fail. They called it Abacus. Goldman handpicked the worst, most toxic mortgages they could find, bundled them into a security, got it rated AA by Moody's and Standard & Poor's, who were paid to rubber stamp garbage, then sold it to their own clients while Paulson bought credit default swaps betting it would collapse. When it did, Paulson made $15 billion. Goldman made billions in fees. And the pension funds, insurance companies, and foreign banks who bought Abacus, they lost everything. You won't believe the receipt is wilder than you think, but we have the SEC settlement documents. Goldman paid $550 million in fines and admitted to no wrongdoing. The executives involved got bonuses. Paulson became a billionaire. And the system that enabled it, still legal, still operating, still growing. Let me break down the financial mechanics in a way that will make your blood boil. A credit default swap is supposed to be insurance. You own a bond, you're worried it might default. You buy a CDS to protect yourself? Simple. But Wall Street turned it into a side bet. You could buy a CDS on a bond you didn't own. Better yet, you could buy 100 CDS contracts on the same bond. It's like buying life insurance on a stranger, then having the legal right to murder them and collect the payout 100 times over. By 2008, the total notional value of credit default swaps had reached $62 trillion. The entire U.S. mortgage market? $11 trillion. That means for every real dollar of mortgage debt, there were more than $5 of bets on whether that debt would be repaid. When the housing market started to crack in 2007, it triggered a cascade. Mortgages defaulted. Mortgage-backed securities collapsed. Credit default swaps got triggered. But here's the truly parasitic part. The banks that sold those CDS contracts never held enough capital to pay the claims. AIG, the world's largest insurance company, had sold over $500 billion in credit default swaps and held less than $5 billion in reserves. When Lehman Brothers collapsed in September 2008, the CDS market froze. Nobody knew who owed what to whom. The entire global financial system, built on a web of synthetic bets and counterparty risk, was hours away from total seizure. Enter the bailout. But here's what they didn't tell you. The Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP, that $700 billion taxpayer-funded rescue, wasn't designed to save homeowners. It was designed to save the credit default swap market. The Federal Reserve didn't just bail out banks. They secretly pumped $16 trillion into global financial institutions through emergency lending programs that were not disclosed until a Bloomberg lawsuit forced the Fed to release the data 3 years later. $16 trillion, that's more than the entire U.S. GDP at the time. And where did it go? Deutsche Bank got $354 billion. Barclays got $868 billion. The Royal Bank of Scotland got $541 billion. Foreign banks got more bailout money than American homeowners, American small businesses, and American workers combined. Let's pause here because the numbers are so grotesque, they almost lose meaning. In 2008, 9 million American families lost their homes to foreclosure. The government's mortgage relief program, HAMP, allocated $75 billion to help them. Less than $30 billion was actually spent. Meanwhile, Citigroup alone received $476 billion in cash and guarantees. Goldman Sachs received $814 billion when you include FDIC backing and Fed facilities. Bank of America got $1.3 trillion. These aren't estimates. These are Federal Reserve documents obtained through the Freedom of Information Act. And here's the moral hazard that should terrify you. Not a single executive went to jail. Not one. The Department of Justice under Eric Holder prosecuted 0 major bank executives for fraud. Instead, they negotiated settlement fines that were fractions of the profits. Goldman paid $550 million for Abacus and made over $20 billion that year. Bank of America paid $16 billion for mortgage fraud and got a tax deduction for the settlement. JP Morgan paid $13 billion, and Jamie Dimon got a 74% raise. The game was rigged, the players were caught, the refs were paid off, and the league rewarded them with bigger contracts. Now let's connect this back to that $2.4 billion loss that started our story. In 2012, JP Morgan's chief investment office in London, led by a trader nicknamed the London Whale, made a series of catastrophic derivative bets that lost $2 billion in 6 weeks. The media called it a rogue trading scandal. Jamie Dimon called it a tempest in a teapot. But look closer. What was the London Whale trading? Credit default swaps on corporate debt indices, the same financial weapon that blew up the world in 2008. And what happened after the loss was revealed? JP Morgan paid $920 million in fines. No executives were charged. The trader was banned from banking. And the derivative positions? They were quietly unwound with help from the Federal Reserve's ongoing liquidity programs. The London Whale wasn't a rogue trader. He was a symptom of a system that had learned nothing, changed nothing, and faced 0 consequences. But here's the really sinister part. While you were reading headlines about the $2.4 billion loss, JP Morgan's total derivative book was $78 trillion. The loss represented 0.003% of their exposure. It was a rounding error, a distraction, a magic trick to make you look at the small fire while the warehouse burned. And that warehouse is still burning today. As of 2024, the global derivatives market is estimated at $640 trillion. U.S. commercial banks hold over $200 trillion in derivative exposure. 4 banks, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Citigroup, and Goldman Sachs control 91% of it. Sound familiar? Because these are the exact same institutions that were too big to fail in 2008, except now they are 40% larger. Their derivative books are 60% bigger. And the regulations designed to prevent another collapse, Dodd-Frank, the Volcker Rule, enhanced capital requirements, have been systematically gutted through lobbying and legal challenges. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's budget has been slashed. The FDIC's resolution authority has never been tested on a globally systemic institution. And the Federal Reserve's stress tests, they literally allow banks to include bailout assumptions in their survival scenarios. Let me say that again. The official stress tests that determine if a bank is safe assume the government will bail them out. They've made the moral hazard official policy. But here's where it gets truly dystopian. Remember how credit default swaps were the weapon that detonated the 2008 collapse? Guess what's the fastest growing derivative market right now? Climate risk derivatives. Banks are creating synthetic securities that bet on crop failures, hurricane damage, and sea level rise. They're bundling climate risk into tradable contracts, selling them with leverage, and building the exact same house of cards. Except this time the underlying assets aren't subprime mortgages. They're the physical habitability of the planet. In 2023, global climate-related derivative contracts surpassed $4 trillion in notional value, and they're growing at 28% annually. The same financial engineers who created synthetic CDOs are now creating synthetic climate bonds. History isn't repeating, it's metastasizing, and the speed is accelerating. In 1929, it took 4 years for the crash to fully unfold. In 2008, it took 18 months. The next crisis will happen in weeks, maybe days, because the markets are faster, more leveraged, and more interconnected than ever before. High-frequency trading algorithms execute millions of trades per second based on correlations they don't understand. A glitch in one market can cascade across 12 asset classes in 14 countries before a human even reads the alert. We're not just walking the same path. We are sprinting down it blindfolded while the people who designed the cliff are selling us parachutes made of paper. So what's the final warning? The final stakes? Here it is. The 2008 collapse wasn't a failure. It was a successful proof of concept. It proved that private institutions could socialize unlimited losses while privatizing unlimited gains. It proved that no crime is too big to prosecute if the criminals are big enough. It proved that democracy bends to financial power, not the other way around. And most importantly, it proved that the public has a 10-year memory. We're angry for a decade, then we forget, then we let them do it again. Except this time, the stakes are exponentially higher. When the next crisis hits, and it will, the numbers won't be trillions. They'll be tens of trillions. The bailouts won't be controversial. They'll be automatic, built into the legal code through living wills and resolution frameworks that you've never heard of. And the transfer of wealth won't feel like theft. It'll feel like inflation, like stagnant wages, like the slow, grinding realization that you're working harder for less while someone somewhere is getting exponentially richer off your labor. That's not pessimism. That's the documented trajectory of a system designed to extract, not to serve. So here's my question for you, and I want you to really think about it. Are we wiser now, or walking the same path in better suits? Are we holding the people in power accountable, or are we letting them rewrite the rules after every heist? If this video made you angry, good. Share it. If it made you skeptical, better. Investigate it yourself. The sources are in the description. The Federal Reserve data is public. The settlement documents are online. This isn't conspiracy theory. It's conspiracy fact. And the only way it changes is if enough of us refuse to look away. So hit that subscribe button if you want more deep dives into the financial system they don't want you to understand. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway. And most importantly, share this with someone who still thinks the system works. Because the biggest lie they ever sold us wasn't about derivatives or bailouts. It was the lie that we're powerless to stop it. We're not. But only if we're willing to see the truth and act on it. Are we?